Right, hello and welcome to the Panachecast. This is episode 7 of Panache Software's weekly podcast, where we bring you the latest news and events in the world of legal tech. I'm Peter Davis, and on this week's show, we're going to be talking about legal tech for conveyancers, an online fraudster who swindled a firm out of over £500,000, and Mark Cohen's article in Forbes about laws emerging elite enterprise legal service providers, which is a free part article in Forbes. But before we get into that, I'm going to welcome my yet again well-branded co-host Neil Pemberton.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Pete. Where's all your branding stuff, by the way?
Well,
the marketing team haven't been in touch with you.
The company can't afford it. They're spending so much on your mug and T-shirt and things.
Exactly.
I can't afford that.
These are matching mug and T-shirt combination this week, but they're not the official corporate colours. But anyway, I'll get onto that in a bit more detail in a minute. Last week we had Rupert Vernals on the show. I really like having Rupert on. It was great for us to chat through his course, and his course, for people who haven't caught the show, was MBA Essentials for, not just for lawyers, but that's, I think, where Rupert started out. But his course is really designed to help people understand the basic framework of an MBA and how you can get the essentials out of it and apply it to your business. So for anyone who's involved in corporate strategy, that's a good place to look. Yeah. If you want more information on Rupert's course, go to www.buildyourownmba.com, or you can email Rupert, Rupert Vernals, that's VERNALLS, at buildyourownmba.com. Just to sort of talk you through that a little bit more, the course, as I said, is a framework course so that you can apply the essentials yourself. But hopefully we'll have a chance to have Rupert back on the show, and we can go through a couple of examples. I always like to go through some live examples with someone who knows what they're talking about.
Yeah, so. And Rupert, he's a really good guy, and he's very passionate about the stuff that he deals with, and had a really good conversation with him. Yeah, which was really good. So
we'll have him back soon. But back to the marketing stuff and branding and brand awareness. Yep. All of this could be yours if you go onto our Patreon page, which is Patreon, for anyone who's not familiar with it. Patreon.com/Panache Software. There are various levels on there, and we've mentioned before about that's where all of our information is uploaded. But if you want to go along and support us, that would be wonderful. If you just go along and put your email address in and click subscribe, then you'll get information about when the show is being released, which in itself would be great. But for an example, if anybody wants to become an associate of the show for, I think, a measly $5, which in the UK
$5 a month,
for £4 or thereabouts, then we'll send you some cool stuff like this T-shirt. And if you don't, that's fine. We just won't send you any free stuff.
That's right, yeah. If you don't sign up, you don't get anything. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, but if you do sign up, then you'll get the benefit of all the show coming out early and so on.
Yeah, and as we add more content, or we're hoping to add more content, and there may be some sort of Patreon exclusive stuff on there as well.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, it's just a way to support us and help us to keep all this free, really, and producing content.
Yeah. So let's crack on with the show then. We've got some reader mail, I think, this week. Pete, do you want to take us through some of that?
So we had a bit of mail from Rachel, and as I said, we want to make this show very much involving the audience and things like that, and people listening. If indeed there is anyone listening out there, we started the show because we were tired of just talking amongst ourselves about this kind of thing, and we want to bringing that conversation out to a wider audience. So we hope that a few people are out there enjoying the content and getting involved. But Rachel emailed us, and she had a question about legal tech in residential plot sale transactions. She works for a regional firm who has a large stream of plot sales from small to medium-sized developers, and she kind of brought up in there something that we've been aware of, in that the transactions for that sort of conveyancing work, they're very repetitive and they can be very admin heavy. So she's kind of looking at, is this an area where legal tech could be utilised? What can she do in that area? And, as a residential lawyer, there's not high fees involved in this kind of work. And it makes it very unprofitable. Yeah. So she's wondering how tech can be used to streamline the process for plot sales transactions and help in any way. Yeah. So it's a really interesting question and something we've touched on before. Yeah. And certainly, Neil, you've got a background or some background with conveyancing and stuff. So I don't know if you can break down some of the finer details of that area.
Well, for those who aren't familiar with the process, we won't go into it in much detail, but we'll just cover it off briefly. That it's obviously the process of buying and selling a property, and we're talking here in the context of residential properties. And it always strikes me how little people seem to be prepared to pay for buying their most valuable asset. And how little people seem to care about the quality. Well, they seem to care about the quality, but they don't pay for it. So, I mean,
it's the same with everything really nowadays, though, isn't it?
It is, but I mean, I would always caution people and say, and if everybody comes to me and says, can you recommend any individual conveyancers? I say, I don't recommend anybody individual, but I'm always skeptical about going for the cheapest quote on conveyancing, because it seems to me to be an industry where people are keen to race to the bottom. And in other words, to snaffle up as much business as they can, they quote cheap. And therefore, they don't give the proper diligence that they should to the job that they're doing. And it's a really, really important bit. I mean, for most people, it's probably one of very few occasions where they get legal advice. I mean, what else is there for most individuals is buying and selling a home and maybe a will, and hopefully not, but some people might go through matrimonial issues. But
it's a major thing, isn't it? And it's something that you potentially only do a few times in your life, possibly.
I mean, we've talked about it before, didn't we? Generation before us is, they've been in the same house for 30 years, 40 years, maybe even longer. So you get some people which will be born and die in the same house. So it's one of those things, especially
now with kids not being able to afford to move out anymore. It's multiple generations in the same house, probably.
They don't even need conveyancing now.
No, not anymore.
Because they can't afford the houses. No. But anyone who is buying, I like to sort of draw a parallel to put into the customer's eyes as to what the life of a conveyancer would be like. And I'm not a residential conveyancer myself, but I know the industry reasonably well. If you can imagine yourself in one of the large Tesco's or Asda's where there are 30 different aisles, and you imagine there are no checkout staff except one member of staff who's going to monitor 30 or maybe even more checkout aisles. That's a bit like what it's, that's what a bit like being a residential conveyancer would be. And you've got one person at each of the checkout aisles, and you're the only one handling all of those different baskets of stuff. And you've also got to remember what's in each basket. So as you go through, and Mrs. Jones in aisle 5 rings you because she wants to know where she's up to on her transaction, you've got to remember where that's up to. So it's really hard being a conveyancer. It isn't easy, and it is a definite skill, even if it's not necessarily the most difficult, conceptually difficult area that would require the highest level of legal training. It's a difficult job to manage, and it warrants decent fees. So, okay, let's get back to Rachel's point particularly. There's absolutely room for LegalTech to come in here and salvage and help out with what is a very challenging part of the legal industry, and it's something that we've looked at before, and we've got to explore a bit more.
I mean, I was going to ask that. I mean, she specifically mentions things like, it's not a very profitable area. People are looking to reduce the fees that they're paying for that, but still getting the same quality of work. How do firms accommodate that? I guess you've got a couple of options. I mean, you can throw more resource at it, but in somewhere that's not very high on profits and where the fees are going down, you probably don't want to be hiring additional lawyers. So I guess the other alternative is to streamline the processing. And that, I assume, is where we can introduce legal technology with some to incorporate new standards and processes within that. Yeah,
definitely. So there's elements of most conveyancing transactions that are going to be the same, right? There's going to be an element of due diligence, which is looking at searches, looking at the title information. There's going to be an element of negotiation of the contract, not much probably on a residential transaction, but there's a contract to be agreed and a transfer, and that's the same whether it's freehold or leasehold. There's reporting on a lease if it's a leasehold transaction, and in itself that could be a potentially quite long-winded job. So leasehold transactions might cost a bit more. There's a bit more work to be done on that, especially when you factor in things like transfers of shares of freehold companies that might own the building. So there's your due diligence aspect, is that, making the inquiries, looking at the title, looking at the search results. You've got your negotiation of the contract and transfer. Then you complete the sale itself, and then you register, or you pay your stamp duty, land tax if it's a taxable transaction, and then you register everything at the land registry. And that is broadly the line, or the the conveyor belt, if you like, for conveyancing that every transaction follows. And obviously within that, there might be the occasional bit of difficulty sprinkled into any particular transaction where maybe a property is missing a right of way or something. Yeah. But generally speaking, because it's so formulaic, I think what's tended to happen in the industry in the past is it's been pushed down to the lowest possible level because everybody's chasing the work, and so they have to do it at the lowest fee. And so you inevitably end up with the least qualified people doing it. Yeah. And as I said before, that's sometimes a mistake, because actually if you buy a really, really valuable building with, even if you're buying it with no occupier in it, the process is exactly the same. Yeah. It's just that they've got several noughts after it that wouldn't be on a house. So, but the process and often the difficulty is the same. Yeah. But you can afford to apply a higher resource to it because the fees will be greater. Yeah. But looking at this, yes, I mean there are some platforms out there already. Like I think Leap Legal Software is as a provider. They turn up at a lot of events and conferences, and their program I think they give you 10 or 20 forms that they will help you complete, that you can work your way through, and it will help you along that conveyor belt, if you like. Yeah. I'm not sure that they necessarily give you the ability to tweak your forms if you want to, whether you're dealing with different types of properties or, if
you've got them very specific to you.
Yeah. I'm not familiar enough with it to know, but there are some solutions out there that do that, but I don't know that they necessarily have the flexibility that everybody might want. And we've talked before about contract automation, like Contract Express, document automation tools, which will help you. Again, those will help you produce documents like completion statements and transfers and contracts, and they'll help you produce documents, but I don't think those will necessarily take you through the process. So you've got two different types of tool there that will help you go through it. What people might consider doing is going on to something like the Legal Geek startup map. Yeah. Because they've got so many different types of solutions on there. There will be case management solutions on there, new ones that will have all the newfangled document automation.
I think one of the nodes in their map is specifically case management. And things, isn't it?
I think if you have we got a note on it. So if you go case and records management, there's a good list of companies on there. In fact, we're lucky enough to be on that map. I
think that's where we might be as well. Yeah,
we're in there, and those solutions will help you not just create the documents and be able to tweak the documents as you see fit. They'll help you get through the whole process. We've talked before about when you log in the morning, and again, go back to the analogy of being the sole checkout person at Tesco with 30 different lines. If you didn't know, you came in one morning and just saw all these lines there, some of them might be halfway through. How would you know where to begin unless your program or platform was telling you? So we like the idea of dashboards saying, how far you're up to on all the various transactions. Maybe as a percentage complete. Maybe there's pie charts showing you. Maybe there's something that sets reminders for you that tells you when some deadline is coming up. Particularly when you're dealing with 30, 50, or maybe even 100 transactions, and you've got stamp duty, land tax deadlines to meet. And if you don't meet them, that's £100 fine. And I think they're changing it from 30. They've changed it from 30 days to 14 days, as you would imagine HMRC would be keen to get their money in sooner. And then you've got land registry deadlines. I mean, there's a whole host of different issues to deal with. So a solution that can deal with as much of that admin as possible is definitely the way to go on this sort of thing, I think.
Yeah, and I think, as you say, we've got solutions. Your choices are, you can look at some of the more heavyweight solutions. Things like Contract Express may not be applicable for the smaller firms. Yeah. For if you're a one-man band or a small high street firm, that might be more overkill for you. For a larger organization, a larger law firm, that might be fine, because you might be dealing with, you might want to roll out something across your whole company. But things like the startup map and that on the Legal Geek startup map can show you these new providers that are doing this kind of stuff, and you'll often find that these are subscription-based services, so they've got a lot cheaper starting point for you. They might not be as feature-rich as something like Contract Express, but there might be enough for you to get going. Yeah. And then, of course, we've talked about it in other shows, organisations like the Land Registry, they're moving more and more to digitise what they offer and provide new solutions in that area. We've talked about websites before where I think you can download all the searches in one place and things like that. So there's countless new providers out there.
That's right.
That are offering these services.
Yeah. Just to finish that point off, and to link it back to Rachel's original point about being plot sales, and I talked about conveyancing more generally, which is buying and selling, but plot sales is obviously what it says. It's just sales. And for developers, that is particularly a circumstance where you'd want you'd want a platform which takes you through the whole transaction process. And so maybe that is something like Leap. But where I was mentioning earlier about the flexibility within the system to be able to create new documents all the time, if you're capped at whatever you can do within somebody's platform, that mightn't necessarily be the right one for you for those circumstances, because if you're acting for a developer, maybe you're doing the work for them at a loss at the moment, or just about breaking even, because you want the real work, which is buying the development sites in the first place and getting involved in that. Every time they do a development, you're going to have a different suite of precedents to incorporate. So however many developments they plan to do, and it doesn't take very long for them to get through them, you really want to have the flexibility there. And also, for anyone who's bought a new build before, my experience of that is you go along to one of the developers and they have some lawyer who's appointed really for them, that's familiar with the site, and the question whether or not that's really good for the buyer or whether you should be using your own. But somebody that's familiar with the site, that's done the work before, I guess it makes sense to use that person because they've done a lot of the groundwork before. But what they often end up doing is it's quite lazy with the drafting. So if you're buying something within a 200 development, you're buying a plot within a development that's 200 units big, you'll find that your transfer looks virtually the same as transfer for, if you're number 200, and it'll look the same as number 1, because they don't go through and necessarily pick out what's relevant to you. And there's nothing wrong with that in terms of drafting the transfer that says, oh, this only applies to plot number 75. But what you end up with is just reams and reams of paperwork. It's untidy and it's messy, and I don't like it personally. That might be controversial, but
I thought you liked reams of paperwork as a lawyer. I thought that was the whole point of.
Well, actually, that's a good point. Yeah, maybe I should go back on what I just said. No, I mean, I to the extent you can exclude clauses, you should, and so that I think you should have a proper tool which allows you to do document automation, as well as a platform which allows you to monitor and run through a process. So it's a combination of a project management tool and a document automation tool that I think people will be looking for. Yeah,
and I think that's the key thing. These are the key points we're looking at, is to streamline these processes, to give you an overview of what's happening on all of these areas. And the decision then becomes, what do I get? And I would say, there's some very established packages out on the market, especially in document automation, things like Hot Docs, things like Contract Express, the heavyweight hitters in that area. But there's also some up and coming startups that are also doing this stuff, which may lack some of the features, but may include other features that are more important to you. So
absolutely,
I think they're the key aspects that you're looking at.
Yeah, definitely
in that area. So if we close that, but again, and if other people listening have questions and stuff, we'd love to cover more things. And what are you looking for in the legal industry now? If you're a lawyer looking for new tech, what area do you deal in, and what tech are you looking to use? And absolutely, it'd be great to hear from others about that.
Well, and indeed, I mean, if there are people who are watching with other disciplines like corporate, or anything which is more of a procedural or transactional basis,
management and things like that, and contract management,
they can benefit from the same types of platforms. And I think that's something else to keep in mind if you're a firm that is not just doing plot sales or whatever. If you're multidisciplinary, then really you want to be looking at a platform that can apply to everything. So keep that in mind.
No, sounds great. Okay. So second item we wanted to talk about, and this is kind of following on from a couple of weeks ago, we in our sort of fifth episode where we talked a little bit about sort of cybercrime and things like that. There was a little article out in the a news article in the Times that we picked up on, which was about some solicitors that lost about £600,000 from a client's house sale in a sort of an online scam. And we just wanted to have a little chat around that area, bearing in mind what we've talked about in cybercrime. So I don't know if you want to fill in a little bit about what the story was.
Well, it follows on nicely from what we were talking about a second ago as well. So in that this was a conveyancing transaction. Somebody who'd sold a house in London for about 1.2 million. The article says something along the lines that they had account details for this seller on their system, on their records. And then they got an email which was from the same name, but it was spelt with one letter different by the sounds of things.
Yep.
And so I suppose in a lot of occasions it could easily slip through the net as something that just goes unnoticed. And I think the firm did the right thing initially in saying, I should say, the email said, I've had a change of mind, could you send half of the money to my savings account? Yeah. Now, we don't know whether that was at the same bank or not. It doesn't say. But that is obviously one of those immediately suspicious things that you latch onto and think, well, that doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
And actually, as the lawyer, I'd say, well, I can make 2 bank transfers now. I can't be bothered with 2.
Yeah.
I'll send you 1 transfer and you can transfer it internally yourself.
Yeah.
So they did the right thing, I think, in ringing the customer and saying, are you sure you want us to transfer some money into your savings account? And it seems from the article as though the story was the person who was selling the house was busy packing their bags and couldn't manage or find their account details, but they were aware that they had a savings account at that bank. Now, again, we don't know what the conversation was, but that to me seems particularly strange, because I think when you and I were talking about it earlier, you might say, well, I never told you about a second bank account.
Yes.
Or, no, I'll worry about that myself. That would, to me, not only is it flagging an issue with the law firm, if you're the customer that gets that phone call, wouldn't you be thinking, well, I never gave you 2 sets of account details, so something doesn't fit right here. Yeah. Nonetheless, the outcome was, unfortunately, half of the money was sent to this savings account, which wasn't the customer's account. And by the time they got there, virtually all of the money was gone. A large proportion of that money was gone and can't be recovered. And the SRA, the Solicitors Regulation Authority, came down really hard on the firm and said, well, you should have known. And
as they probably should have done, really.
Yeah, as you should have known. And can you replenish this person's money within a couple of days, please? So there was not any sign of forgiveness from the SRA. So, okay, that might be an insured risk, but let's say that the insurance money is not going to come in overnight. So that firm probably had to make up the shortfall of whatever it was, 500,000 or thereabouts, out of their own pocket, which, that could cripple a lot of firms out there. And it could
especially just small high street firms and stuff, or even one-man bands.
Yeah. So the other interesting thing that came out of the same edition of the Times was, we mentioned last week about cybercrime, that the head of operations at the National Cybercrime Unit said that they were short on resource in order to tackle all the cybercrime that's going on out there. And I think we all have seen evidence of cybercrime becoming much more of an issue. I mean, we all receive emails that purport to be from, you were talking earlier, PayPal or Apple or whoever, saying, can you reset your details here by clicking on this thing? Yeah. And that is that's the warning flag, isn't it? But getting back to this specific article, what sort of things could we be doing to prevent theft like this in the future? Are there any ways that tech can help us with that?
Well, yeah. I mean, one of the things for me that this highlights is that, as well, when we talk about things, and they mention it in these articles, that this is cybercrime and things like that, and you think all complicated stuff, but actually, what happened in this instance was a very simple thing. It was not a complicated plan. Someone sent an email to the firm with a slightly different email address asking for this. Several steps down the line, when things were misinterpreted or whatever happened, that actually got the money transferred to them. So this wasn't a complicated case of hacking into systems and getting these things. It suggests that the person sending this email understood when the completion was going to happen and things like that. But, we discussed beforehand, how complicated is that kind of thing to determine? If you can walk down the street and you can see what houses are for sale, you can see that a house is now sold because of the banner. So you can then see, okay, this house is being dealt by this estate agent. How complicated is it to ring that estate agent and say, oh, hi, I'm acting on behalf of someone at this address. Can you just let us know what the completion date is? We haven't got it for our records, or who's acting for this person. And these little bits of information along the way, like the completion date, the name of the solicitors acting for them.
Yeah. You can get the name of the seller from just going onto the land registry records and downloading it.
Exactly. And these, in of themselves, are tiny little bits of information that don't sound much, but allow you to build this thing where they knew when the sale was happening. They knew the solicitors involved. They knew the name of the person selling, and they were able to spoof this bit of information.
Yeah.
So, I don't think there's necessarily foolproof things you can do to stop this kind of thing. There was just a catalogue of errors in this case.
Yeah.
But, we've often said in some of the things that we've been looking at to do with our platform and things is, we want to take away the boring stuff that lawyers have to do.
Yep.
Let the lawyers worry about the exciting things.
Yep.
We'll do the boring bits and pieces. And that's where you want technology to pick up in this instance.
Yeah.
You can have systems which integrate with your email services. Now, how complicated is it to have a list of valid email addresses against this person's matter or this person's property sale? And for you to say, okay, you've now received an email, but it doesn't match any of the addresses. That could just be flagged to the lawyer instantly. Because it may be that this email came into the lawyers and they didn't think much of it because it looked similar in the address. So they didn't think to initially question that. Whereas a software solution, in a very simple check, could say, I've had an email and it's not by anyone on the approved list of emails. So that would have then created even more of a red flag for a person like that. You can introduce new portals, client-facing portals for people, which allow them to add information online and stuff. And maybe you do things that way. So you're eliminating then just email conversations or phone conversations. You can send an email to the person via the portal, and it's going to the correct address to get the response from. It's those kind of things where the tech can do very simple things for you.
And presumably, if you're doing the portal example, the individual crook, and unless they're sort of following you around or there's someone that isn't going to necessarily know your username and password, and you can have a lot of different. You can have lots of different ways, can't you, to make things more secure? Like when you're internet banking, for example, you need, your username, your first password, your second password, and quite often when you're logging on with a new machine, they'll text you and say, this is a new activity on a different machine. We've never seen this before. Those things are not that complicated to do. They're pretty secure because that's what all the major banks are doing, aren't they? So the information, the technology is already available for people to use it in those circumstances. The other thing, and going back to the simple view, when you meet these people, I mean, I'm the paper pusher, right, rather than the technology person. So you presumably meet them to do your know your client information, which is checking the passport and proof of address. Maybe the proof of address was the bank statement with the bank account details on. I don't know. But that probably ought to now form part of that firm's checklist, right? Well, which account do you want us sending money to? And part of your instruction is probably, we will not change this account detail unless it's verified and properly verified with you. And having a phone call with a customer who says, I'm a bit busy to check the account details, but yes, I've got an account there, isn't really proper verification.
No.
It's very poor to have gone through and actually they missed that the email was different, but they actually found, this is unusual, and made the phone call, but then didn't see it through. Well, again, and maybe the platforms can have certain levels of authority checks and approvals, such that if you're changing someone's account details on your own system, now these may have been just in the front sheet of a file for all we know, but if it's on a portal somewhere and the account details are changed, if it's changed by the customer, then it has to be verified by a phone call to them, maybe, or them coming and visiting you, but preferably, some easy way. But if it's changed internally by the associate or paralegal or whoever's doing the work, then it's got to be signed off by the partner with a bit of evidence that suggests that it has been properly done.
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing, isn't it? The more that we can automate these things, and the more that we can add steps in there, process steps, which look for additional confirmations and things like that. It means that it's not as simple as your client just sending an email and saying, can you change this, and it gets done, or you having a quick conversation and you change it. I mean, you may think that may add additional workloads and additional time to the processing, but there's trade-offs in that as to if it's a more secure process, then it's probably worth it.
Yeah, I doubt there's as much time spent as there is now trying to recover £600,000 of lost money.
Exactly.
500,000.
Yeah, so I think it's looking for those kind of solutions that do those kind of things, that help you manage the process better to avoid these kind of things. And, simple things which these providers of these systems could implement to try and flag up these kind of things better, either internally or to the buyers or the clients, so that it just adds an additional amount of red flags on them.
Yeah, absolutely.
To look into. So an interesting thing.
Yeah. So should we move on to Article 3 or item number 3 then, which was something that we fished out of Forbes. This is an article by Mark Cohen about enterprise legal service providers. Now, we'll put all the links in the show notes afterwards. There are actually 3 parts to this, and we've picked up on parts 1 and 3 really. But we'll talk a little bit about part 3 because there's a bit of overlap as to what we've talked about before. But it's really about the shift, and the overall theme seems to be about the shift from the old way of dealing with legal services and legal practice into the new sort of enterprise service. And he makes a couple of references in his part 3 article, but there's a couple that we want to pick up on of a handful of providers that have emerged as legal delivery's new architects. So he's picked out Allen and Overy, who we mentioned in week 3, and the way in which they're revolutionizing their delivery of legal services. And there are 2 or 3 elements to that, one of which is this Fuse innovation hub, which we've talked about
before, haven't we?
Which is where they're providing incubation space for startup companies to come and work with them, and delivering and building the technology that helps them work in a more efficient way. And
working directly with the startups, giving those startups access to lawyers and processes.
Exactly. And we've talked before as well about AI solutions in particular, and how they really need data and information to become more useful and more powerful, and working with firms like that from the start. Hopefully they have that so that you grow in confidence with your AI solution from day one. So he's highlighted Allen and Overy's Fuse tech innovation arm as something significant. And then also a project management office, which, that's looking at the way in which you deliver the overall work package, and bringing in expertise from, different sectors and people that are not necessarily lawyers and have the legal acumen and the legal knowledge. It's bringing in people with the expertise of how to get a transaction from A to B and onwards and finished as quickly and as smoothly as possible and profitably. So he's highlighted a couple of points there for Allen and Overy. And then also the Big Four. So this is the Big Four accountancy firms, and they're providing law as professional service. Now, we've talked about EY and briefly about the other 3, PwC, KPMG, and Deloitte. In week 4, I think it was, where we were talking about EY's acquisition
of the Thomson Reuters legal services arm, didn't they? They acquired,
exactly. So. And the outsourcing of legal services to outsourcing of legal services from the clients of the firms, or traditional clients of the firms, to these other professional organizations. And we know from having spoken to people at these sorts of places before, particularly the accountancy firms, where they are essentially number crunchers, and they are extremely good at knowing where the profit is within a transaction. And I guess if they're doing legal service, enterprise legal services, they're delivering a service for customers. Probably 90% of it fits down a very neat tunnel and doesn't have much complication to it. And we were talking a bit before the show about where that leads us, and whether or not law firms, traditional law firms, and we can come on to some of the other stuff that Mark says, but the traditional law firms will really see a sort of shrinking demand for their traditional and previous service, i.e. legal practice and legal advice, because that seems to be shifting a bit now.
Yeah, definitely. And, as you said, the other aspects of this, it's a 3-part article, and it covers a huge amount of this, and it's really talking about how the different way that the kind of the elite law firms and stuff look on things, and how how the new enterprise legal service providers look at the industry differently. And yeah, there was a lot of good quotes in here, and you know, they're talking about, you know, the escalating demands on the corporate legal consumers to do more with less. And I'm not sure this is just the corporate legal consumers. I think it's everyone is looking to do more with less. And that's raised their expectations and performance bars to levels that even elite law firms cannot wholly satisfy. And I think it's talking about, you know, those elite law firms, you're governed by your high fee earners and things like that. The law firm isn't really set up to deal with necessarily very high volume, low cost work. Whereas these new legal service providers are coming in and saying, we'll do that for you. We'll take that high volume work. We've got potentially less skilled people doing it, but it doesn't need that level of skill with it. And we talked earlier about, you know, whether you use these legal services to do the bulk of the work, and when you actually have a significant issue which needs sort of a more complex look at, that's when you engage your standard, your normal law firms to do that kind of work. But for the general day-to-day work, it's handled by, you're outsourcing that work to someone. Rather than building up your own in-house practice to do it, you're getting someone else to do it for you. The law firms aren't equipped to cope with that kind of thing.
No, and I just wanted to repeat what you said there about the performance bars to levels that even elite law firms cannot wholly satisfy. It really suggests there that the firms have not kept up with the demands of the customer. And I don't know whether it's necessarily the demands of the customer or the expectation or what it is, but you talked before about some of these new companies now. If you wound the clock back 20 years, the client landscape looks very, very different. You know, there are no Facebooks and, you know, Amazons or there are Amazon in its infancy. You know, the client demands are different. Everything's fast now. And traditionally legal services have not been fast because they're built on billable hour, and it doesn't work that way anymore.
And let's pull out one of the other quotes in here. They're saying, you know, that they require a new class of providers with scale, substantial capital, and ability to integrate legal, business, and technological expertise backed by a seamless global infrastructure to tackle sophisticated, high-value business challenges. Now, how many global law firms are there that, you know, have expertise in other areas to provide this thing?
Not many.
There's probably not many. No. So
I don't know any. In fact, you know, I think a lot of firms have talked about it before. I can remember having and hearing conversations of firms as long ago as 10 years ago, thinking about it and saying, "Oh, you know what? We're a big property firm, and we do a lot of work in this particular sphere. Shouldn't we consider merging with a surveyor's outfit, you know, and a bunch of agents?" And I think the internal resistance against that was no, because then we potentially cut ourselves off from the referrals from all the other agents that we don't merge with. But certainly all those things you just mentioned, which I can't now find on there, the scale, the agility, the financial flexibility, and be able to deal with technological advice as well as business advice. That is what the likes of PwC and Deloitte and EY and KPMG have in absolute spades. That is their business model, and they do it really well. And I do not see any way of the law firms catching up with them. I mean, there's a lot of news now, isn't there, about those big four accountancy firms getting broken up because they're too big here and they've missed the boat on several big meltdowns, as at Carillion and other things like that, where they've just not done the proper job on it. But nonetheless, no one knows what happens, what the future will be there. But they are absolutely marching all over the legal service space. And actually, you go back just a few years ago, you would find the Magic Circle type firms, or Magic Circle firms and the Silver Circle firms now, wouldn't touch the work that they were touching 15, 20, 30 years ago. And I mean, I've seen several leases and things of flats which, you know, they've got Linklaters and Clifford Chance on them, and that's just not the kind of work that these people are going to be doing anymore. So their whole business model has shifted to much more specialist, high value advice that they weren't doing. Well, they maybe were still doing it several years ago, but they wouldn't touch that kind of work now. That's for people like Howard Kennedy and Eversheds and people who are providing this much higher volume of production line. And we've talked about the service, and I think who was the other one that we mentioned? Adolfo Goddard, I think, who mentioned their own versions of the legal managed services. Well, they're mopping all that sort of stuff up now, but I don't think they even could get into this idea of business advice and advice in areas outside of legal. So.
And we've talked a lot about, the emerging new technologies and things like new AI solutions by people. I think it's like people like Raven and stuff like that, which do contract analysis and things like that. These are things that you would previously go to your lawyer to do. There's now AI solutions to do that kind of work for. Because there's those kind of solutions out there, we typically thought of those being marketed at lawyers and in-house legal teams to speed up their work. But these are services that these other legal services can use to offer those bits of work to people. So, rather than the lawyers taking advantage of this new legal technology, other people are taking advantage of that new legal technology to offer legal services. Which is a really interesting
It is.
thing.
Actually,
change.
Funnily enough, I saw, I think it was, I want to say Jones Lang LaSalle, but it may have been another one, but I think it was them on LinkedIn saying the other day that they are now using an AI solution whose name escapes me, but it'll come back to me in a minute, to do a lot of their lease analysis for them. And obviously this is a huge time saver, and it might be stuff that they would have outsourced to a law firm before, tell us about when the break dates are coming up, tell us about the rent review dates coming up, all those sorts of things. These things are now held centrally, and their AI platform is either extracting it or holding on to that information. It's doing a lot of the work for them, the admin work we've talked about before. So you can see, can't you, these little, I don't know, like piranhas nipping away at the legal industry here, just taking chunks out of it constantly. The managed services are being taken, the administrative services are being taken by the technological aspects. The industry is really coming under a lot of pressure now.
It is, and let's kind of close it out with one of Mark Cohen's last quotes in one of his conclusions to this. He said that multidisciplinary, sophisticated, efficient, cost-effective, scalable, agile, holistic, and needle-moving solutions are not the stuff that even elite law firms are made of, much less other firms. And that says a lot. These other organizations are doing that, and they're encroaching on the business of the normal law firms. And it's because everything's changing. The whole industry is changing, not just the law industry, but outside of that is moving on.
Absolutely. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the future.
It certainly is. It's a real change. It's all changing. So I mean, let's close out by talking about some events and things like that. Last week, not last week, the week before, in week 5, we mentioned the National Cybersecurity Centre's CYBERUK 2019 event in Glasgow. And I don't know if any of the listeners called up and attended that event or not. But you picked out, if you missed that, there were a lot of highlights on the Cybersecurity Centre's website, weren't there?
So if you go to ncsc.gov.uk, it's right there on the front page. There are video highlights there and notes you can go and look at. And also, I mean, we've looked at it before, but I was amazed at how much information is on their website about cybercrime and security and so on. It's a treasure trove of information, and if you are struggling with some of the issues that we talked about before, cybersecurity and crime, and you're worried about it, or you're absent of any policies on it, then that's probably a pretty good place to start. There's reams and reams of information on there, loads. So go and have a look at ncsc.gov.uk. And so we've got two events to recommend this week. Both, if you Google SRA events, you'll find them, but we'll put the specific notes up on the show later on. The first one is on the 16th of May. It's at the Hilton Hotel Deansgate in Manchester. This is talking really about GDPR requirements and data breaches and so on. Jane Malcolm of the SRA will be there to update people on the recent offensive communications guidance note. So for anyone who wants to be much more offensive in their correspondence,
there's some guidance notes of
how you can
reverse and then figure out how to be more offensive if you want.
But, so go along and check that out. And then there'll be other sessions on IP rights, advertising law, reputational management, and data, and so on.
But I mean, there's a huge. I mean, GDPR is such a huge thing at the moment, and I think any information you can get on that for the solicitors is a bonus.
Definitely, we have to cover that at some point ourselves, and also we've mentioned before briefly about how that interplays with things like blockchains and so on. So we'll have to spend a bit of time on that. So if there's any GDPR experts out there, then get in touch. And then item 2 is the 21st and 22nd of May, Stratford-upon-Avon, Crown Plaza. This is the Institute of Money Laundering Prevention Officers. It's not necessarily directed straight at lawyers, but for the law firms that have money laundering reporting officers or equivalents, or for if you're a firm that doesn't have one of those and you're the nominated partner, then that's going to be of interest to you. There'll be insight there from regulators and supervisors, legislators and enforcers, how to prevent and disrupt financial crime activity whilst providing superb networking opportunities. It's not just lawyers that will go to that. It'll be accountants. It talks about here gambling and gaming, money service businesses. There we are. Okay. That's
right. And it just fits in with everything we've been talking about in these kind of cybersecurity aspect on things. This is going to be key stuff going forward. This is a huge issue now as everything moves online. And, some of the stuff we were talking about earlier details how simple some of this stuff can be. You often think of cybersecurity as people hacking into systems, as Tom Cruise breaking into a building somewhere and parachuting out or something like that. That's not the case. It seems that you can just phone someone up and ask them to change your bank details, and that often works. So, for people who are looking to just find out more about this area and find where to go to look for help on this kind of stuff, these are great sources of information.
Absolutely. I don't think you can go too far wrong if you go to them. If you're following what is the industry-leading examples of how you tackle cybercrime, there's a lot of information there that's available to go along and pick it up. And like you said, it's not difficult to get it right. It's one of those things. It just is a bit of a distraction from the main part of the job, but it's an unavoidable one. Unless you want to get stung in the way that others unfortunately have been.
And as we mentioned before, have a look at things like Legal Geek Startup Map and things for all these new startups which are coming out that are bringing new solutions which may be able to help with this kind of stuff. And have a look at that. Get involved in the Legal Geek conferences and stuff like that, and go and see what people are doing and where they can take some of that out of your hands and look after it for you.
Exactly.
And help you out.
So if anybody else is out there who is hosting their own event and wants to tell us about it, then we'll give you a shout. If you email us at panachecast@panachesoftware.com. Any viewer responses or feedback or questions like Rachel asked us, then again it's the same address, panachecast@panachesoftware.com.
Or you can, as before, get in contact with us at Patreon at patreon.com/Panache Software. Ask away on there. Sign up on there, and we'd like to prioritize anything that's coming in from Patreon as well, any questions and stuff. But get involved and leave comments, and all the links to everything we've been doing will be in the description of the videos or the audio that you're listening to.
Exactly.
So until next week.
Until then,
we will see you then.